going to go over why fat is so important. The animals that we hunt are essentially athletes, are they not? And so they run away from predators. They chase, they chase down their prey. They kind of focus on just being an athlete their entire time on Earth. And so the science of fat is really kind of understanding how to implement fat across the board. And why is it important that we need to add fat? Because fat equals flavor, right? However, there is a point of diminishing value as you start to climb as the amount of fat. If you've ever had like a Kobe steak, or you've had like a piece of steak that just has way too much fat, even if the marbling is perfect, there can be a point when it just tastes like gristle. It's just too much fat. Our palates are built to know that when we pair fat with sugar and sodium, we start to get endorphins. That's like the sweet spot. I guarantee you, if you were to think about the food that you would most want, like, hey, this is my last meal on earth, this is what I want. It's going to be something that's going to be very, very close to humble kind of comfort food, soul food. And I guarantee you it has those three elements. It has sugar, it has fat, and it has sodium. You put those three together, endorphins, fireworks go off in your brain, and you want more, right? So looking at how the smell and the fat and the texture of the fat actually go together, it's all about mouthfeel, right? So when you're actually starting to break down and you start to actually chew fat, those carbons and all of your carbons that are in there actually lift into your sinuses and give you all of the scientific kind of information that you yourself are looking for. You're like, oh, that tastes so good, okay? So the difference between saturated fats and you've heard saturated fats, unsaturated, polysaturated, polyunsaturated. All these are how the microbes are actually built. Some of them are really, really good for you. Saturated fats, believe it or not, when they come from an animal using bear tallow or bear grease, or actually using some really, really good duck fat. Duck fat is currency where I come from, because we're in South Texas, we don't get many ducks. But duck fat is something that is delectable. It's beautiful, right? It's very, very good. And so you're looking at olive, you're looking at soybean, you're looking at canola, and in exceptions, you have your cocoa and your coconut oil. And then these actually have a higher smoke point. So a smoke point is this: whenever you start to heat a fat, when I say fat, I mean butter. When I say fat, I mean oil. It's a fat. So when you start to heat it up, you're going to get it to a point when it starts to break down. It becomes too heated that they'll break down and it'll start to smoke. This is what we call the smoke point, right? These oils will actually have a higher smoke point because of how the molecular structure is set up, okay? So saturated fats like bear fat, deer and sheep, these are going to have a much lower smoke point because they actually do have they have a little bit more fat that is actually locked in to those cells. This is one reason why whenever we start to cook with butter has a very low smoke point. If we have a very hot pan and we put the butter in the hot pan, what will result is it'll burn off really, really quickly, and no one can eat it at that point, right? And so these actually do not stay solid at room temperature. If you just let it sit at room temperature, it'll actually start to melt, okay? So a little bit about smoke points. So these different types of smoke points lend themselves to many different applications. So what I mean by that is that if you're actually going to look at it and you go, hey, you know what? I love to do a lot of stir fry. Stir fry is a searing. That's a very high heat, right? Roasting would be the same. So at the very, very top is your avocado, your safflower, and then obviously your soy. And these are, what essentially that means is that they can actually be pretty hot in the pan before they start to break down. The crazy thing is that the cooking of meat, the searing of the outside of a steak is actually going to be right around your 300 mark. You're easily above that at 520. So these kind of across the board will lend themselves to a lot of really good applications, right? But when you get further down, you have ghee, which is actually your butter, your clarified butter with the butter fats or the milk fats taken out of it. And then you have your really good stuff. You have your duck fat, you have your lard. These right here are great for pan frying because it's a solid constant temperature. Right around 350 is what you want that temperature to stay. If you ever had a deep fryer, the deep fryer at 350, 375 is perfect. Now, are you going to go take a big container of duck fat and pour it into your deep fryer? If you're crazy and you're really, really wanting a lot of flavor, you can. I don't suggest it, however, because we talked about that point, right? It can be too much fat, too much saturated fat. So we just want to be careful with that, okay? And butter being at the very, very bottom. Now, I get a lot of questions, and the questions are, hey, you know what? I use extra virgin olive oil in my cooking. Is that okay? The thing about extra virgin olive oil is this. What ends up happening is it's the first cold press of an olive is your extra virgin. They take an olive, take it off the tree, they run it between two stones. The first oil that comes out of it is your extra virgin olive oil. This, if it's a good quality olive oil, it still has sediment in it. It still has pieces of the olive in it. And it actually hasn't had a chance to oxidize. So they take that and they make sure there's very little oxygen. This is very good for salad dressings. This is very good for eating raw. All of these things are awesome. What you want to do is use those in a cold application. Olive oil is the third and fourth, if you're regular olive oil at the store, your third and fourth press of that olive. So a lot of times you'll realize, hey, you know what? I can use this one for this and not for that. So extra virgin, keep in your salad dressings. Keep it nice and room temperature. It's perfect at that temperature. Okay, so factors of fat flavor, age, diet, and so we're talking about the fat coming from the animal. Okay, so if this is a bear, has anybody ever had a spring bear before? Yeah, have you eaten a spring bear? Yeah, you know what it tastes like, right? Yeah, and so, but if you're eating a bear and that bear is actually spending a lot of time, gorging itself on rotten fish because they don't care, you know. What they end up doing is that will translate into the meat. If you were talking to anybody and they're saying, you know what, I love that I come over to your house and you make game protein for me. I love it, but I just can't do the gaminess. The gaminess will exist within the fat structure as well as the bones and the ligaments. If you get a piece of pure white-tailed protein off the backstrap and you treat it like a steak, you'd be hard-pressed to really kind of get that gaminess note in that protein. If you spend the time to actually extract as much of that fat and that bone and ligament off of there, that's where the concentration of what their diet lies. So that's what I mean by the diet part. Whatever they eat will translate into it. If we were to take a white-tailed deer in South Texas where I'm from and you just feed them corn, you feed them wheat and seeds, essentially they're going to, all the time, they're not allowed to eat clover. They're not allowed to go eat sagebrush. They will start talking. They will start talking. They won't talk. They will start, thank you. They will start actually tasting rather like a beefsteak will. Because they're accepting the same enzymes, they're accepting everything else, and their body's naturally going to pay back in kind, right? And then species, that is a big one. Species across, like a black buck is in the same family as a nilgai. Those taste completely different. I love black buck, but if you're going to put it up on a flavor scale against nilgai, it wins every single time. So this is a little bit about the white, the brown, and the yellow fats. Each one of these will lend themselves either to flavor or for texture. Some of them will render down a little bit easier. So when they actually start to render down, this is where you get the application of frying. This is where fat equals flavor really comes into place. Because when you slow cook, and like if you, does anybody here cook their bacon in a cold pan? Yeah? Starting your bacon in a cold pan, and if you want to learn a really cool deli trick, or we call it deli tricks, this is what they do like in quick service restaurants. When you get the bacon and it's perfectly crispy, they actually will put it in a cast iron skillet, right? And they start off with their bacon and a little bit of water in a cold pan. A little bit of water. So what happens is as it starts to cook, the water will actually boil the bacon, cooking it. And I know you're like, wait, boiled bacon? You were talking about flavor, now you're talking about boiling bacon. What happens is it brings the protein and the fat at the same level. It cooks them at the exact same time. So what you get is you get fully cooked protein, and then it leaches out into the water. The water evaporates, leaving the fat, and then you're frying the bacon in its own fat. In French, we call that confit. Okay? So this is the absolute best way. When you get it, I like my bacon super, super loose, right? Almost raw. That's the way I like it. So, but a lot of people in my family, I actually grew up on a ranch, and on a ranch you cook everything until it's done. I mean, super done. And so I would make that type of bacon for my family, and it would just be this crispy, wonderful piece of crispy bacon, and they love it. And it looks like it should be in a picture, right? Okay, natural flavors. We talked about this. A lot of off-putting flavors are going to come from exactly what they eat. I mean, all of that comes from exactly what they eat. But if you're looking at if you're hunting elk in Colorado and they're spending a lot of time grazing through trash cans, which they do, or the moose in Yellowstone are getting fed all sorts of randomness, like the little goldfish, that will translate into the meat, and you won't taste the Pepperidge Farm goldfish, but you know what I'm saying. It will start to lend itself to it, and that's something you don't want, right? Rendering. So we talked about this a second ago. Rendering is starting in a cold pan and allowing heat to do all the work for you by pulling that fat out into the pan. If you continue to fry that fat in the pan, you are resulting in that confit that we talked about. Like a duck confit, you've heard of that. Duck confit is actually rendering out or taking a whole duck breast and frying it in a pan of its own fat. Okay? So again, you're using the animal's own fat to fry in it. And essentially every time you make bacon, if you do start to cook the bacon in its own fat, that's exactly what you did. You were doing French cooking. You didn't even know it. How about that? Well, so rendering takes time. Rendering takes patience. You need to actually focus on the process. Obviously, don't walk away like my dad did one time with bacon and just let the whole house burn down. Just try not to do that.